formed by the fusion of some endodermal swellings. So two lingual swellings, one tuberculum imbar, one hypobronchial eminence. So these are all called as endodermal swellings. So these swellings fuse to form the mucous membrane of the tongue. Where these swellings are formed, first you should know. So they are formed at the ventral end of the pharyngeal arches. Actually these are all the pharyngeal arches. If you trace all these pharyngeal arches towards the floor of the mouth or anteriorly, they are getting fused with each other. So with the corresponding arches. So first arch will fuse with the first arch of the other side. Like that, second arch, third arch. Okay, now at that ventral end of the pharyngeal arches only these endodermal swellings are formed. So the first what is formed is two lingual swellings. So these two are the lingual swellings. They are formed at the anterior end of the first pharyngeal arch. Now behind that we have for the formation of another swelling that is called as tuberculum imbar. So this is unpaired, that is present in the median plane, but these two are paired. So these three swellings are formed at the ventral end of first pharyngeal arch. Now this is second pharyngeal arch. Here we don't get any swelling. Now this is third, fourth, of course followed by we have sixth. So ventral end of these arches we have the formation of another large swelling that is called as hypobronchial eminence. So now fusion of these swellings only leads to formation of our mucous membrane of the tongue. So first we will see what happens to these three swellings. So these two are lingual swellings. So these two swellings are getting enlarged and getting fused with each other. These two are getting fused with each other. Then we have fusion of tuberculum imbar with this. So ultimately all these three swellings are getting fused. But major part of anterior two-third is formed by the fusion of these two lingual swellings only. Very small part of the anterior two-third in front of our foramen cecum is formed by this tuberculum imbar. So fusion of these two lingual swellings with each other and fusion of tuberculum imbar with this forms your mucous membrane of anterior two-third of the tongue. So already in the gross anatomy we have studied dorsal surface of tongue is divided into anterior two-third and posterior one-third, separated by the V-shaped sulcus called as sulcus terminalis. At the apex of the V we will be having foramen cecum. So this is the site of foramen cecum. Okay, so now fusion of these three swellings forms your anterior two-third. As I told already, major part is formed by the fusion of the two lingual swellings with each other. So if there is any failure of fusion of these two lingual swellings with each other, leads to bifid tongue. So in the anterior two-third you can make out the separation of the tongue called as bifid tongue. Actually this is normal in snake. So in snakes embryologically you don't get the fusion of these two. Okay, so that is your bifid tongue. Now we will say about your posterior one-third, how it is formed. So as I told already, hypobronchial eminence is formed at the ventral ends of your third, fourth and sixth pharyngeal arches. So now this hypobronchial eminence is getting divided into cranial part and caudal part. So this is the cranial part, mainly contributed by the third arch. Now this is your caudal part, that is that this caudal part is going to form our epiglottis. Only this cranial part of hypobronchial eminence is getting fused with this your anterior two-third of the tongue to form posterior one-third. So posterior one-third is formed by hypobronchial eminence, anterior two-third is formed by these three swellings. So as I told already, what I am telling now is the mucous membrane of anterior two-third and mucous membrane of your posterior one-third. Now if you see the development of tongue muscles, so that is separate. So the tongue muscles are formed from the occipital myotome. So the occipital myotomes are forming that your all the intrinsic as well as extrinsic muscles of the tongue. Okay, so that's why the nerve supply of tongue is important. You should be able to correlate the sensory nerve supply with the development. So already we studied about the nerve supply, sensory supply of tongue. So if you take your anterior two-third, your general sensation is carried by lingual nerve. Your taste is carried by your chorda tympani branch of facial nerve. How you are going to correlate that nerves with your development of anterior two-third? So already you know that these three swellings are formed at the ventral end of first pharyngeal arch. So nerve of first arch is mandibular nerve. So the lingual nerve carries general sensation. So that lingual nerve is a branch of mandibular nerve. Now what about your chorda tympani? Chorda tympani is the pre-traumatic nerve of first arch. So already I told in the class itself. So the mandibular nerve gives rise to lingual nerve. Your chorda tympani is the branch of facial nerve that is considered as pre-traumatic nerve of first arch. So that's why the nerve supply for anterior two-third is derived from your nerves of the first pharyngeal arch. So post-traumatic nerve is the mandibular nerve. Pre-traumatic nerve is your chorda tympani nerve. Like that, if you take your posterior one-third, as I told already, cranial part of your hypobronchial eminence is mainly contributed by your third pharyngeal arch. So what is the nerve of third pharyngeal arch? Already you know, that is your glossopharyngeal nerve. That's why your taste as well as your general sensation from the posterior one-third is carried by your glossopharyngeal nerve. That's what you should be able to correlate the nerve supply with the development of the mucous membrane. Of course, motor supply, you know, all the intrinsic muscles as well as your extrinsic muscles are supplied by your hypoglossal nerve except palatoglossus. So that is supplied by cranial part of accessory.